I'll tell the boys and girls a story this morning about twins. Do we have any twins in our church? Very good. Brother Thomas is a twin. Any other twins? You're a twin? Becky? I didn't know that. All right. And Brother Mills is a twin. Well, that's great. Are you identical twins? No? None of you are identical. All right, I want to tell you a story this morning about identical twins that happened one day after Christmas when these boys were 11 years old. Now, we have a lot of 11-year-olds here this morning. I thought I would tell you this story for two reasons. It drives home a great lesson. And secondly, it happened at Christmas time when there was a lot of snow on the ground. It was much cooler than it is this morning. And I've heard a lot of people talking about it being warm today. Now, I hadn't really noticed that. But if you're warm, why, I thought maybe this would sort of counterbalance that, you see. These twins for Christmas each got a sled. They lived in the country where there was a lot of snow, and out behind their house and the barn, there was a long hill. And oh, how they enjoyed sliding and sledding and tobogganing and playing on that hill. And this Christmas time, they each got a beautiful new sled. And they were very anxious to try it out. Christmas Day, they went out and they slid down the hill, carried their sleds back, and came down again. They just had a tremendous amount of fun. The next day, the day after Christmas, Mother and Father had to be gone on some business. And they told the boys not to go out and play on the hill with the sleds while they were gone. Just a practice that they had made in their home, that they didn't want them out on their sleds. And they said, all right. But you know, Mother and Father hadn't been gone long until they looked out the window, and out beyond the barn they could see the hill and the tracks they had made Christmas Day. And they began to think how much fun it would be to be out there going down on their sleds. And finally one of them said, and the other one had been thinking it, why don't we go out and play on our sleds for a little while? Mother and Dad will never know the difference. We know about when they'll be back home. We know about how long it's going to take. We'll put the sleds away, and they'll never know the difference. But the brother said, no, you know, we promised Mother and Dad that we wouldn't do it, and we shouldn't do it. Oh, he said, you're a sissy, you're yellow, you're afraid, and you know how boys can talk. And so finally, one of them had the sled, and the other one was following with his sled, and they were out on the hill. And they had a great time. They came down the hill, they made some new trails, and they were just having more fun than you can imagine. In making some of the new trails, as one of them was cutting a new trail and the other one coming behind, he hit a rock, and it turned his sled, and he rolled off, and his brother was coming on his sled, right behind, and there wasn't time to stop. And his brother ran his sled right across his cheek, and it cut a terrible gash. Now, these boys had had a tremendous amount of fun in their school days by their teachers and fellow students not being able to tell them apart. And they were sort of practical jokesters, and often they would switch seats. And the teacher would call for seats. And the teacher would call for George when she really needed John, you know, and they had a great time. You teachers maybe can understand that better than I can. But when they had the little accident there in the snow, the blood started gushing out, and they rushed to the house and were trying to stop the bleeding just as Mother and Father arrived home. Now, he was not hurt to the point that it affected him in any way, other than this. They rushed him to the doctor and sewed it up, and it left a scar on his cheek. And it was always easy from then on to tell the boys apart. And as they told the story in later years, the one still carrying the scar, he said, you know, that taught me a great lesson. It taught me that it was better to obey than sacrifice my identity. Now, you think that through. You could easily tell who they were now. And they'd had so much fun. Do you know the Hayward brothers, John Hayward and what's the other one? Elder Hayward, John Hayward's president in the Illinois Conference. You know, he and his brother look identically alike. Years ago, John Hayward pastored the Dallas church and his brother the Fort Worth church. And so one morning, unbeknownst to anybody in the audience, they switched pulpits. The elders on the platform knew it. And when Elder Hayward came out in the Dallas church and the other one in the Fort Worth church and started preaching, they thought it was their pastor. And they had more fun that day. They had not sacrificed by giving a scar to give away their identity. And so, boys and girls, remember, it's always better to obey than to sacrifice. It's better to obey God, His will and His ways, than to sacrifice.